I loved learning about the 5th Duke of Portland's home, Welbeck Abbey. Could you kind of teach us the oddities of this home? Because I think it's an interesting way of thinking about, oh, this is a great, second, third, or fourth home for someone. What did that actually mean, and how bizarre could that be?
I mean, the Dukes of Portland had estates in Nottinghamshire and the English Midlands at Welbeck and around Welbeck for generations. I mean, for 200-300 years. The 5th Duke of Portland, though, for reasons we still don't quite understand, he became increasingly reclusive. It started, he had a townhouse in London and he put up kind of frosted glass around the gardens so that neighbours couldn't look in, which is an odd thing for a duke to do, because people just generally didn't look in. That was weird. Yeah. But then his main ancestral seat, Welbeck Abbey that you mentioned, he started to go underground. He started to build tunnels under the estate so that he could go to and fro to the nearby station, in a carriage, which was then lifted onto a flatbed truck, so he didn't have to see anybody and taken down to London.
Wow.
And it reached its kind of climax, I guess, when his heir, the 6th Duke of Portland, arrived after his death in the 1870s. He found that the private apartments that the 5th Duke had got, they all had big brass letterboxes in the doors, so servants could shove food through and collect empty plates. They all had lavatories in the corner with ducal coronets on the top. So he could, whenever the mood and nature took him, he didn't have to move very far. But it was a very strange setup. He could... The thing is, he was a duke, and in a deferential age, people might kind of raise their eyebrows. But to be honest, dukes did what dukes wanted to do. You don't find, apart from a few kind of Republicans and radicals, you find Britain, even in the 1870s and 80s, a deferential society, one with careful social hierarchies, which are observed, and the rules that go with them are observed. So people kind of knew that the Duke was weird, but, so what? There are lots. One of the things I've found in researching the power and the glory is that there are a lot of weird landowners, an awful lot.
Yeah, no, and I that's the other thing is, like, I think I think people often would assume, I think of them like pro athletes. They're good from far, but they're far from good. And I think that's what we can take away from your book as well. I loved, you talk about the tunnels. I mean, two cars could go next to each, or two carts, I should say, horse carts could go next to each other in the tunnel. And I think he had an elevator which would then lift his horse cart up into the home so that he never had to be outside and be seen. And it has almost kind of like use a movie, an Edward Scissorhands feel to it, where he was a recluse doing whatever he wanted, with also machinations of objects and tinkering that, while open floorboards were in the floor of a nice house.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. And he actually built an underground ballroom, and he had another lift. So guests could arrive at Welbeck Abbey in their coach, in their carriage, and the lift would take them down to this underground ballroom, so they didn't have to get out. But he never entertained. He didn't actually sort of, he never had balls. It's the most peculiar setup.
Was it the Duke's home where you commented, and I'm trying to go off notes here, and you commented the Duke's home did host an event where obviously Franz Ferdinand attended, but it was for hunting, I think, and you joked around that history would have been massively different if events had played out differently at the Duke's home, and really speaking to how important some of the people were that would attend these events in the English countryside.
Sure. I mean, the 5th Duke's successor, who was a cousin, the 6th Duke of Portland, he was a great entertainer. I mean, he was a great sportsman. He had 2 or 3 shooting estates in Scotland, as well as a house in London and Welbeck Abbey itself. And Edward, Prince of Wales, who will become Edward VII, George V, they were regular visitors. And the incident that you refer to, when Franz Ferdinand in 1913 was part of a shooting party at Welbeck, that's right, one of the beaters dropped his gun, one of the loaders rather, dropped his gun, and it went off, and it just missed Franz Ferdinand's head. And the Duke of Portland, the 6th Duke, said, just imagine what had happened if we'd accidentally blown Franz Ferdinand's head off. There would have been no Sarajevo. Maybe there would have been no World War I, which is a strange thought, isn't it?
Very, very strange thought. So you talk about this term, the nouveau rich. Can you explain, when the nouveau rich would show up in the English countryside, how was that looked at? How was that accepted? Because you start to get into what I'll call old money versus new money, and there was also this idea of nobility versus money. So how would the blue blood snobs, if you will, deal with the nouveau rich?
This became a kind of central part of my book, I think. I was really surprised at, the conventional wisdom is that the industrialist, the engineer, the factory owner, having made his money, what he wants is social acceptability. So what he does, he buys a country estate where, he can mix with the county set, where his wife can entertain, where his daughters can teach the local Sunday school and go sick visiting in the village. It's a kind of dream. It's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And there's a sense that, again, the conventional wisdom suggests that people like this were looked down on by the traditional landed aristocracy and gentry. The establishment looked down on these incomers. In fact, you start to look, and it's much more complicated than that. For one thing, a lot of these incomers were so much richer than the traditional landed, and money spoke. You might laugh at them behind their backs. You still wanted to get invited to their parties, always. You do have industrialists. I mean, one of the people I talk about in the book is William Armstrong, who started out as a lawyer, became an engineer, became a ship owner, became an inventor. He invented the breech-loading rifle, which made him, he was an armaments manufacturer, made him a fortune. And he built himself a huge country house in the north of England, Cragside, one of the most wonderful houses in the world. And it's a crazy place because it kind of evokes the past. It's not a modern country house. It's got half timbering, it's got battlements, it's got Georgian bay windows, and it's a lovely romantic house. But inside there are hydraulic lifts, there's electric lighting. It's one of the first houses in Britain to be lit by electricity. It's a modern house inside, but looking back to this softer past. And Armstrong was accepted, and he's accepted because he's massively, massively rich.
Sure. I'm going to jump around here a little bit because you talk about this later in the book, but it reminds me of a question. So, I think the singers would be my case study in going from nouveau rich to being what would be socially accepted in those circles, because obviously singer of the sewing machine fame, it took one generation to be fully accepted, is my theory that I took away from your book. And so as I think about my own children, it's like, okay, I'm not the prize. They are the prize.
You're doing it for them. You're doing it for them.
Yeah, is that a fair assessment, that it took one generation in each case to usually be fully accepted?
It depends, I think. I mean, we need to explore the singers who are among my favourite people in the entire book, I've got to tell you. Isaac Singer, as you say, he patented the sewing machine and made a fortune out of it. He amassed a huge fortune. He also amassed a huge family. At the latest count, it's something like 24 kids by a variety of wives and mistresses. And he wasn't always particular.
Elon's got a number to shoot for now.
You said that, not me.
Okay.
but yeah, he has this enormous fortune, this enormous family, and he finds himself rejected by New York high society. He's American. He lives in New York. He's rejected, and his wife, they're rejected by New York society. They move to Paris and then to England. And he builds himself a country house, an enormous country house. Now, he dies he's accepted by local society. He's looked down on a bit by some of the the more established landed types. Sure. But his son, Paris Singer, and we're in Brooklyn Beckham territory here. He's called Paris Singer because Paris is where he was conceived, and he makes the house even bigger. It's a place called Old Way Mansion, and it's a wonderful, wonderful house. It's in need of a lot of love and care at the moment. It's not in a good state, but it's a fantastic. It's like a miniature Versailles. It's this vast French chateau in the middle of the Devon countryside in southwest England. And Paris again is so massively rich. Paris if he was around in the 1940s and 50s, we'll say he was part of the jet set. You know, he's got apartments in Paris, in New York, in London. He eventually wanders down to Palm Beach and decides to build himself a resort there. I mean, Paris singer starts Palm Beach.
Sure.
But while he's in England, he plays the part of a landed gentleman. You know, he actually adopts the role. And there's a sense in which these incomers, well, you know, they played the game. Some of them, sometimes they didn't want to, and sometimes they would sort of skip it. But most of the time, they would play the game that would earn them social acceptance.
Sure. Yeah. Because I also think, I mean, he got his way all the way to a role in the coronation of the king as well. Yeah. So it wasn't just the nobles accepting him. This was all the way to the royal family.
Yeah, absolutely right. And partly that's because Edward VII, when Queen Victoria dies in 1901, but for the last 30 or 40 years of her reign, Edward, Prince of Wales, is the public face. After her husband, Prince Albert, dies, she retreats into mourning, and Edward, Prince of Wales, is the face of royalty. Now, Edward accepts his set, called the Marlborough House set, because Marlborough House was where he lived in London, and his friends that he gathered around him. They're a different type. They're not the traditional courtiers. You've got bankers, you've got industrialists, you've got Jews. You know, in a fiercely anti-Semitic society, Edward, Prince of Wales, and later as Edward VII, he surrounds himself with Rothschilds and Cassells and Baron Hirsch's, and these are people who traditionally are outsiders. They're not part of British society. But
if you're going to go out for a big party, these people could throw quite a party. And if you're going to go out to all hours of the night, I mean, these are people that had the money to do that. Isn't that just kind of, he was yoking himself to the lifestyle he wanted?
Absolutely right. And they paid for it. They bankrolled it. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons he surrounded himself with very wealthy Jewish financiers was because they could cough up when he was hard up. And he was quite often. You know, he's in debt quite a lot. Ernest Cassels was acted as his banker. And, you know, when he made losses, Ernest Cassels sucked them up. When he made profits, Cassels gave him the money. You know, so there were practical reasons for it. But it did mean that it broke down a lot of those traditional social barriers.